pretty good crowd now. Welcome to Book Talk. I think this is the fourth one we've done, and it's been a great experience. We've talked to a lot of very interesting people. Now we're going to keep this going. Today we have Rick McClosky and Janet Holmes. We're going to start off with Rick talking about Van Nuys Boulevard 1972, which for the guys in the audience, we all seem to be pretty much of the same age. Wherever we live in the country, this book is going to bring back memories, whether we were actively involved in the car culture or not. I came across Rick's work a couple of years ago when he was playing with this project, and I think long before it started to become a book. So I've been kind of in the background watching what was going on. And he reached out to me a couple months ago, and I jumped on the chance to get him to come in today. Before we get going, just a couple of short rules. Let these presenters do their thing. It'll be 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll do kind of an open question and answer thing. During the presentation, please turn your mics off so we don't pick up coughs and bird sounds and cats and dogs. And we will be recording this today. So if you have an aversion to being recorded, don't say anything. And after today, we will post the recording on the website so you can come back and listen to it again if you want to. So I guess that's it. So I guess we'll pass it over to Rick, let him start, and enjoy 1972.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, whichever it is. It's still morning here for a few more minutes anyway. This was a project that I undertook, kind of an assignment I gave myself in 1972. I was 26 years old. I'm going to hold up the book so that I don't know whether the light will be good or not, but this is the book. This is the end result of what we're going to talk about this morning. I grew up in Van Nuys. Actually, technically, my mom would get after me for saying that we actually lived in Sherman Oaks, not Van Nuys, but we lived very close to Van Nuys Boulevard and moved there in the late 1950s. And this cruising culture had already begun in earnest. It was a really big thing when I was a 11-year-old kid. So I grew up with it, and my time in participating in this was probably from the 61 to maybe 65 after I was out of high school. And that's generally the time that people would be there on the boulevard, although, there is some extension over 18, 20, 22 years old. I went back in 1972 after gaining the photographic skills to document this happening on the boulevard. Essentially, it wasn't just a matter of people and their cars. The cars were kind of a prop in a sense. Part of the stage setting. The boulevard was the stage for everybody to be out there. There were people who walked out there. There were people on bicycles and motorcycles, of course, and people in cars. It wasn't just for car culture people, and certainly there was a great deal of that. There were different clans. There were, over the years, the surfers and their vans, and the lowriders and their lowrider cars, and kind of an entourage of people who gravitated toward each clan, and I'm using clan kind of broadly here, but these were folks that came from all over Southern California, even in out of state. So I went back in 1972 with the express intent of documenting this. I hadn't seen anyone do this work before, yet it was such a pervasive culture in not just Van Nuys in Los Angeles, but in every small town. There was a cruise strip, even if it was only 2 blocks long. And I've gotten so much feedback from people who grew up in small towns that said, oh, we used to cruise Main Street and it was 3 blocks and they had their own favorite little restaurant, drive-in restaurant or whatever it was. Well, Van Nuys Boulevard was kind of like one of those capital streets. There were 3 or 4 of them. Hollywood Boulevard, of course, was the oldest, and that went back to the 1920s. And it was just always a kind of a cruise strip for people on foot. But Woodward Avenue in Detroit, Whittier Boulevard in Los Angeles, and Van Nuys Boulevard, these were the main cruise strips. Now, I shot the pictures over the summer of 1972. They're all black and white, Tri-X film. I pushed it to 800, ASA 800, and on occasion, 1200, which results in some pretty substantial grain. But from a technical standpoint, yeah, there's a lot of camera movement in the pictures. I was dealing with radical differences in light. Sometimes there just wasn't enough. So I would have to lean that camera on anything I could find. Sometimes I set it on the ground. I got pretty good at it, figuring out, you know, how to get what I needed. And I'm okay with it being, some of these images being a little bit soft because there was camera movement, slow shutter speeds, all that. But I shot the pictures. I came out with about 4,000 pictures. And at the time I printed them, it took a couple of years. I worked on them for a couple of years. I had one show of the work at Cal State Northridge in 1974 at their main gallery. I printed the pictures large. I thought that that was a good presentation for them, kind of bigger than life. They were, some of them were 24 by 36 and 20 by 30. At any rate, I kind of went on with my life after that, moved to Hawaii for 17 years, and we ended up here in Washington in the early 1990s. These pictures were all kept, the negatives were all put away for 4 decades. And about 7 years ago, I pulled them out and digitized them. And that was quite a project. I've ended up with about 1,000 pictures that I digitized, which is a pretty good score out of 4,000. Are they all grade A pictures? No, but there's some good supporting work there. And I began to post some of them on social networks and pass them around and actively look for gallery support and representation and the concept of having a book. Well, I showed these pictures to so many publishers, and as anyone who's ever tried this knows, you're going to get turned down. And many of them will say, oh, this is great stuff. We'd love to publish it, but, you know, send us the check and we'll be glad to do that for you. And that's not exactly what I had in mind. But last year, a couple of different publishers got a hold of me. The first one was Sturm and Drang, a fellow named Reto Cadiff, and he's out of Switzerland, publishes art books, and he's done a couple of dozen of them at least. And some of them are very personal books, and some of them are a little broader interest, but he's gotten pretty good at, you know, making a book that looks good. And that involves not only the layout, which involves other people, but like the cover, the selection of covers. You know, you want a nice product. You want something that people can hold in their hands and feel comfortable that they have something that's worth having and has a value in and of itself. But we set about going, going into the design work on this, which took 6 months or so. We were ready to produce the book, print the book in February when the pandemic virus thing kind of hit everybody at the same time. They closed the borders. The printer was in Germany. It just restricted us from printing the book. We postponed it, and that was kind of an indefinite postponement, ran for several months until about June, when the publisher got a hold of me and said, it looks like we're stuck in this kind of online world from here on out. And I think the book is good enough so that we can sell it online, and it will work. So we went ahead with it, and the book came out. It was printed near the end of June. I don't remember the exact date. And it was limited edition, of course. And it has sold very well. We're down to the last couple of hundred books. And I mean, there may be some, we did sell some or offer some to book distributors, which is part of the program in producing a book. You need to find some people that are, in the business of distributing books. And at least half of them we distributed and offered ourselves for individual purchases, and bookstores. And there are probably still some bookstores. I know there's a few in Los Angeles that are carrying this book that still have some. So we're going to have some books available for a while, but it as a book has been a successful project. And it's been a real learning experience for me. And I've gained so much knowledge of what is required for a book that as a photographer, it really wasn't my gig. But if I had to do it again, I think I could, advance this procedure quite a bit. It's opened up a whole new kind of realm of ways of presenting other work that I have, and we'll see how that goes. But right now, we're riding pretty high on this because it's selling really well, and people have enjoyed the book. I've had some good reviews. I mean, Newsweek hasn't reviewed it, and the New York Times hasn't reviewed it, but we're still doing well. It's been well received. Is there anything else I can add here, or questions, or where do we go from here? I believe you're muted.
I had a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Hi, Richard. Thanks for talking. I wasn't sure, did you mention how many books you had printed to begin with?
We did 1,000 copies. So that's a limited production. We could have done somewhat more, but with the only sales online and all this, and the bookstores not being open for people to peruse books. If you go to bookstores, and I'm sure you do, you go to that photography section and you start pulling them out and say, what's new here? What do I, and you end up taking a couple of them home. But we didn't have that available. So it was kind of a shot in the dark, so that we limited it a little bit just as a financial risk.
Well, that's a great number of sales between the short period of time it's been out. That's really great.
Yeah, we're very happy with it. And I actually did a short TV interview for a kind of a related project for one of our local TV stations. And they have a couple of million followers on their Facebook page. I'm sure that little interview is going to be put up with me holding the book up and a little blurb on it. It probably won't be very long, but I have a hunch in the next couple of weeks when that airs, that'll probably just kind of end up the books, except for a few we're going to keep for a while. And in the end, there actually is this possibility that books are hard to get and they gain value. We've already had a couple of collectors buy books from us, you know, and their idea is, we don't care what the book is. We know that it's a limited edition and we get the first edition, that, you know, if I sit on this for 3 years or 5 years, it'll be worth $100 or $200 and we're selling the book for $49, by the way.
This is Daryl Ann again. I just wondered, so do you think, since you say it's limited edition and you're looking at it to accrue certain value, do you think you'll reprint it if it sells out, or this is it?
This is an open question. This may be the one and only printing of this book. You know, because it sold so well, it certainly is within reason to consider that, but the publisher wasn't too keen on it. He said he reprinted one of the books that they had a really good sales on, but the rest of them, even if they were good sales, in some ways it's better to allow them to be really special pieces and to accrue a value for, and this isn't for everyone, but it is for some people. You know, so we haven't really made that decision yet. You know, people have asked, and in a way, you know, yeah, I could see it. You know, let's do another one, but we'll see.
I'm just curious, yeah, because sometimes things languish afterward, and that's terrible also. And I wondered, do you mind, I don't know if this is the right time, but I wondered, a lot of times people have to contribute finances to the publishing and so forth, and I didn't know if you mentioned
choice.
that.
It was a choice. We did contribute a certain amount. It wasn't necessary. The publisher, he probably would have run with 1,000 copies, whether we had chipped in or not. And we, of course, could have chipped in a bunch of money, well, within reason, and you know, said we'll do 1,300 or 1,500, but you don't really want to end up with 300 books in your bedroom for years and years. It kind of, especially when you've never published your own book before. This is a learning experience, and okay, it has this book. The subject matter has a wide range of interest. That's not always true for everyone's work. You know, many people do very esoteric work, and it takes a long time for them to build up a following for that work. You know, if it's good work, eventually, you know, they'll get there. But this is kind of an American cultural experience, so we had a ready-made following.
Thank you. Thanks.
Oh, you're welcome.
Richard, is it possible for you to show images from the book?
I can turn some pages for you. I haven't set up a slideshow for this. That's a little scary on my technical capabilities for a Zoom meeting. So I'll be more than happy to hold up this book and turn pages, and we'll see how that goes.
Okay, yeah, just try that for a few images so people can get an idea.
Let's see. This is sort of like show and tell.
Right.
Okay, there's the lead image, and this is kind of a classic shot. It was a gift from God, really, for a photographer to come upon this scene on the boulevard. It's so California of the time, and it's more or less everyone's favorite. It's a hard to beat shot, but there's all kinds. I'm trying to look at my screen to see how these are showing up.
Yeah, they're okay. I may think they're okay because I'm familiar with them, but.
You can find these if you look up Google Cruising Van Nuys Boulevard. A great number of my images have been published in various forms and places. Some of these are kind of busy for this particular showing, but you can find these images, a good number of the ones in the book, the chosen ones in the book. And that's another thing about when you're dealing with publishing, you know, your publisher and your photographer may not have the same idea as to which images belong in the book. There's a little bit of everything in here. I shot the people. I was more or less interested in the people when I was shooting this series. Not so much the cars. They were, of course, backdrop and part of the stage setting, no question about it. But essentially, the people. That's, you know, all these folks are in their 60s now, all these young kids. Some of these are showing up better than others.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
The vast majority look like they were photographed at night.
Oh,
Was that a conscious decision?
yes. It was a conscious decision. Essentially, the cruising scene is a nighttime thing. Most everybody had jobs or went to school during the day, and
Okay.
along about 6 o'clock or 6:30, and most of these are Wednesday night pictures. They're pictures from what is known as cruise night. Wednesday night was cruise night. Friday night and Saturday night was a busy time as well, but Wednesday night was the night in the middle of the week when everybody was out there, and this goes back to the 1950s. Wednesday night, cruise night.
Okay, Richard, Susan has a question about the editing and design process.
I'm going
How much
to
of
set the
that
book down.
was shared between you and the publisher, or did the publisher run with it?
The publisher has a gentleman in Los Angeles. The publisher is a Swiss citizen, but he lived in Los Angeles for many years, a couple of decades, I believe, or more. So he's, you know, quite familiar with the scene, the so-called scene in Southern California. He has a designer named Karsten Steinhausen in Los Angeles. And it was a collaboration. And this is like, this is the way it is when someone else is publishing your work. They are going to have their own idea of how to lay out a book. They're going to go through your work. They're going to make selections, and we went back and forth for months on the order, and he sent me several PDFs, and right up until we told the printer to print it, we were changing images and correcting images and making adjustments. I had to kind of learn that there was another way of looking at this. You have to be able to turn pages in a book and have it flow in a certain way rather than try to deluge people with the photographs that you think are the best of your project. So there were many decisions that were made that were collaborative, and let's just say that I had my ideas and they had their ideas, and we went back and forth on it. And you have to be somewhat flexible. And I'm happy with the book. Okay, there were a couple of images from a technical standpoint that I thought we could have delivered a little better. But in terms of the choices, yes, we substituted some things that were kind of my favorites. but I had to kind of, you know, give that up to some extent. And when someone else, excuse me, when someone else is publishing or producing your work, yeah, you do have to make some compromises. Now, you don't have to make those compromises. There's a point where you can say, no, I want that picture. That picture must be in there. We're not going to take that picture out, you know, and there were a couple of those. And okay, it's a back and forth thing right up until the day that they turn on the presses.
So we're going to wrap it up kind of quickly here. When I Googled Van Nuys Boulevard 1972, I was amazed at the distribution you were getting. There must have been hundreds
of press coverage, you mean? What has happened is, you know, and from a gallery perspective and a fine art perspective, in the last 3 years, I have received a lot of press coverage. Yeah. The 1970s, for some reason or other, seems to be a hit now. You know, a time that folks want to go back to. Okay, I got it. And things were different then, but I've received a lot of press coverage, and that has precipitated gallery representation and a value to my fine art prints. We're working on silvers now, silver prints, reprinting silvers. I had a good number of vintage silver prints that are handled by the Joseph Bellows Gallery in Southern California. There's a limited number of them. I don't have any more. I printed them in the 1970s. Fortunately, I did a lot of them, but we're going back and we're doing new silver prints now that have been corrected, digitally corrected. It's an awesome world. And they have a surprising value. I don't really want to talk money, but I think that if you get your book out and you get your press coverage and you get your gallery representation, you have something of value. And other people, there are people out there that understand that and will purchase that work. So it's been a very good trip for me, and it's growing. I have to say that the book has helped tremendously.
One last thing, where do you suggest people head if they want to buy the book? Or do you care?
If you want an individual book, and I'll even sign it, you can go to rickmack.com, and that's RICKMACK, and you can buy it directly from me. And if you contact me, you can go to info@Sturm&Drang. That's STURMANDDRANG. That's the publisher. He still has copies. And if we run out of books, we can direct you to the bookstores that still sell online and may have a few copies. We want you to have a book while we still can have them available for you to have.
All right, Rick, thank you very much.
I'll just sit here and observe the rest of this conversation.
Sounds good. Can you see the chat, Rick?
Yes.
There's some questions in there that you may want to address on your own. That some of them, you know, we grabbed and asked you, some of them we didn't.
Okay. Let me just read these down. Richard,
don't address them verbally to us. I mean,
you want me to answer them on chat?
If you want to.
But not verbally?
Yeah, because we need to get going with.
Okay, fine. I understand.
Okay, thank you, Rick. We'll pass the torch to Janet, who's somewhere up here.
There we go.
There
now I'm going to experiment with share a screen, and hopefully this works.
Now, those of you that frequent the Southeast Center have probably seen Janet's work on the wall over the last few years. It's pretty recognizable.
Okay. What is my view that I want to be looking at this view? Okay. So, so this book, as I said, I mean, I think first of all, I also just want to sort of reiterate that my appreciation for Michael and his gallery. Since I have moved back to Canada from the United States, Michael has made it possible for me to exhibit work sort of, relatively easily and, from a financial perspective and from a practicability perspective, because it's so hard to ship work from Canada to galleries. So I do appreciate that. What I thought I would do with this is I would sort of show you some slides of this, of the book, and then talk a little bit about kind of the philosophy behind the book, a little bit about my background, and then the process of pulling the project together and making the book. So this is the first image, kind of once you sort of get past the cover. And here's a few more. So this project is really part of an overall approach that I take in terms of art and activism. And it asks the question, as you can see, how do we decide which animals are family and which are food? And, why do we find it surprising to see chickens in the house, whether they're looking out the kitchen window or investigating the laundry? And especially since chickens are in most of our houses, just, on the table, as flesh or eggs. In terms of my work and sort of who I am, here's a few more images from the book. I actually got involved in photography relatively late in life. I started sort of really kind of when I was close to 50, and it actually coincided with my deciding to get involved in animal rescue. I'm a lawyer by day, and I'd always loved animals, but I had been really afraid to get involved with animal rescue because I didn't think I could handle the heartbreak. And eventually I realized that animals needed me more than I needed to be comfortable. And so when I was living in New York City, I started getting involved. And one of the first places I started working as a volunteer caregiver was the Wild Bird Fund in New York City. And kind of coincidentally with my decision to start getting involved in helping with animal rescue was a decision to start exploring photography by studying it. And so I started taking courses, especially at ICP, and those two things came together so that what I ended up doing on a nonprofit basis in New York was sort of making portraits for animal rescue, whether it was photographing dogs that needed to be rescued at various shelters or visiting farm sanctuaries. And one of the things that happened was that as I spent more time really looking closely at animals, I mean, holding them in my hands and taking care of them, photographing them and studying them, I really started to question kind of my values and saying that I loved animals and yet I was eating them and wearing them and doing those kinds of things. And so I had a kind of an epiphany on a visit to the place where this photograph was taken, Catskill Animal Sanctuary north of New York City. And I realized that what I really needed to do is sort of, act on my values. And so I ended up deciding that I was going to commit to becoming vegan. It took me a little while to get there. And that I was going to use my photography really to help animals and sort of advance the kind of the cause of animal liberation. Now I'm going to sort of jump forward, to the book. And so this project started in 2017 in New York City in January, and it started while I was volunteering at the Wild Bird Fund. And I met a hen who was suffering from severe reproductive illness. And, even though I'd been vegan for a couple of years at that point, I didn't realize that was a thing. I didn't realize that laying eggs frequently made the birds so sick. She had sort of an infected abdomen. She was at high risk of cancer. There were other kinds of issues. And so after she was treated, she needed a home, somebody who could afford the kind of the continuing care that she needed. And because I was friends with a number of people in the animal sanctuary community, someone asked if I could help. And I started networking to see if I could find a home for her. And that resulted in me being dropped into a Facebook group called Vegans with Chickens. And I discovered that there were all these people who were rescuing chickens and living with them in kind of what you might call a micro sanctuary environment in their homes. And that many of them were people who I would say are identified as female or had reproductive organs like wombs that tend to be associated with female, although they didn't necessarily view themselves as female. And again, I started thinking about that, and I thought about how there was this interesting parallel. And think about the timing: January 2017, inauguration, noise in the media about threats to reproductive health care and reproductive rights. And I thought about how, really we've been taught that exploiting hens' reproductive systems is normal. And there are many places in the world that really still controls the reproductive rights of sort of humans with wombs. And that made me think about this interesting parallel. And I was meeting these people online, and I thought this would be really interesting to explore as a portrait project. And so that's what happened. I just started making some photographs of the chickens and their rescuers. And I think, so I started in 2017. I photographed a lot that year, and then sort of continued into early 2017 when I took a little bit of a break because I moved back to Canada and also managed to break both my arms, and therefore found it difficult to take photographs for a while. That allowed me to sort of sit with the work for a while and look at it more carefully, focus on printing and sequencing and doing those kinds of things. I also started to have it in exhibitions, sort of one image at a time. But it also, actually a series of the images of the chicken only portraits were selected for the national edition of The Fence in 2018, and actually won the People's Choice Award. So there was a sort of good publicity around that. And I sort of went into Medium Photo Festival and with having sort of shown the work that way, and then into Photo Lucida in the spring of 2019. So I'd had sort of time to work with it, time to sort of experiment with a portfolio, and had started making photographs again when I got the cast off my arm and was sort of able to pick up a camera again. So one of the things, I guess, as well, is that although the project originally started with this fairly narrow focus on hens and people who might identify as female, I quickly learned that this was really a kind of a broader subject. And so really the photos sort of broadened in terms of who I was photographing. I started to look at roosters as well as hens, because roosters are kind of viewed as the garbage of the chicken raising movement. A lot of roosters, you are allowed to have hens in a number of places, but you can't have roosters. And so the roosters get thrown out. They get used for sport and cockfighting rings. And they're just chickens dumped all over the place. There are chickens used in religious sacrifice rituals. And so I was really photographing chickens coming from a lot of different environments, and kind of broadening as well kind of the sort of scope of who I was photographing, and trying to make the work a little more representative as well. So coming to the book, I think relatively early on in the process, I decided that I wanted to sort of show this work in book form. And really that is sort of part of the kind of the advocacy behind the work, as a way of reaching more people. It's also a kind of a validation for the people who are giving so much of their time and money and love to sort of have a record that is in the form of a book. I viewed it as a way also for people who are involved in the animal rescue movement as a kind of a place of sanctuary for them, even to sort of be in the book and see the images. And I'm a big bookworm, sort of myself. So that was sort of one of the reasons. Having the book also allowed me to deal with one of the biggest challenges as well in the project, which is that a lot of the images are quite whimsical. It's a happy place that I'm photographing when I'm doing this work, but the stories underlying the project, I was constantly hearing the stories, are actually quite sad frequently. And how do you share that? How do you have that balance in a way that I didn't really want to depict the horror? There are other people like Joanne MacArthur who do a beautiful job in terms of photojournalism of showing that work, but I didn't want it to just be kind of funny and silly photographs, even though that is part of the world. And so I thought that what I would be able to do was share some stories. So there's sort of a mini essay that I've written that is spread across a few pages of the book. And then what I did was I asked 5 of the people, this is one of Julia in this book, who are involved as my subjects in the book, if they would write mini memoirs about an aspect of rescue. And so you have stories from people in terms of the loss that they experienced when one of their chickens died. You have the story from Julia about a
The sound is gone.
Are we good? Okay. So I wanted to, as I said, I sort of essentially commissioned those short essays from people. And those are sort of interspersed in the book, and try to balance them with happier image, because there's at least one in there that is actually one of the darkest things I've ever read. In addition to that material, I also asked two of my mentors to write essays, kind of more classic essays for the book that appear at the back. One of them is from Janelle Lynch, who was one of my teachers at ICP. The other one is from Kathy Stevens, who is the founder of Catskill Animal Sanctuary, and sort of really influenced my approach to advocacy. When it comes to sort of putting the book together, as I said, I sort of showed the work in some portfolio reviews. The publisher that I ended up choosing to make the book was Care Verlag in Germany. I had seen their work before, especially Martin Osborne's book, Where Hunting Dogs Rest, and I loved it. I met Alexa Becker at Photo Lucida, and she was really interested in the project. So even though I'd shown the book to a few other publishers, that was kind of the obvious kind of link for me. And so I started working on the book with them after doing some more photo sessions in late November of last year. I have experience with having sort of self-published books before, and I had taken a course at ICP that was involved in sort of doing your own sort of work in terms of proofing and preparing the work and packaging it for a publisher. So I had that experience behind me. And then I worked with the designer of the book, who was in-house, on the sequence and the style and the design, and worked through those issues. I'll show you what the actual book looks like. It's relatively small. You can see it's about 9 inches by about 9 3/4. It's got about 55 photos and about 120 pages overall. And I was, really kind of sort of part of the decision-making process, and that was producing a book. It sells for 35 euros that would have some broad appeal, not just to the photo book collector audience, but sort of more generally. And I think that's what Kara thought as well, that this might be something that is appealing to sort of a wider audience too. And I wanted it to be something that if my rescuer friends couldn't actually afford to buy for themselves, then maybe at least their family member could buy them a coffee. I think I'm going to stop there in terms of sort of talking about the project, and sort of give people a chance to ask questions more about the process.
Anybody have anything for Janet?
I can also, and I forgot to mention, also can talk a little bit more about the Kickstarter process if people are interested in that.
Janet?
I'd like to see more pages if possible.
And actually you can see the whole book as a flip through. And I'm just, for some reason, my slides are not going. Let me just see. There we go. Seem to be sliding again.
Janet, can you put some of the links when you have a chance in the chat so that we could go through them?
Siri suddenly decided to start talking. Sorry about that. And actually my, the last slide in this actually also has my website address in it, which you can go to. And also really, you can even go back to the campaign page on Kickstarter to see a little bit more of the story. But that will give you, that's where you can go if you're interested in ordering the book from me. If you're in Europe or somewhere other than North America, I'd recommend that you get the book directly from Kier.
Janet, can you speak a little briefly, and maybe I missed it. I know you ran a Kickstarter. I just kind of flipped over to your Kickstarter campaign, and I personally have run Kickstarter for films. So I'm just a little curious when you said you picked a publisher. So essentially you used your Kickstarter money to pay the publisher to publish the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I could have theoretically funded this myself, but I didn't want to. I did hope to sort of raise some money for the book through the Kickstarter campaign. But I knew that if the Kickstarter failed, I would be, my pockets would be empty, but I would be able to do it. For me, raising money through the Kickstarter also meant that I would be able to go back to doing what I have been doing kind of all along, which is working mainly on a nonprofit basis for my photography. It meant that I would be able to go back to donating services, donating prints, donating things to the rescue community, because my cash would be freed up a little bit in order to be able to do that. You can't raise money in a Kickstarter for charity, but it meant that my money I could reallocate my own funds.
And how much care are looking for?
Sorry, I'm not really comfortable sort of sharing that, but it's not a small amount. I mean, on the other hand, you do get, the price in terms of what you're looking at when you're sort of working with their model includes a batch of the books that you sell yourself, and then you keep the profit for those. You also get, I think, their publicity and their promotion and their logistics and those elements of it, as opposed to sort of doing it kind of purely on your own through certain other kinds of publishing groups. As I said, I did a self-published book a few years ago. It was actually a children's book through Conveyor Editions. And so, I mean, I paid for that myself, but it had a specific place where it was going to be sold. So I didn't really need the publicity for it. It looks like Gail's asking a question, but I can't hear her.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't actually get the name of the publisher. What was the name of the publisher?
It's Keher, Kehrer.
Do they have a selection process to decide? I know that you coming with, people come to pay for it, or do they take, is it a process?
There is a submission process, and they only take a certain number of titles. Yeah. I'm aware that some people, have pitched to them and not got anywhere. With us, it was sort of more of a, as I said, I sort of met with them at Photo Lucida, and it felt like that really, really good first date, where you like hit it off in 20 minutes and you want to see more of each other. I mean, it was essentially like that. As I said, they were the top of my list in terms of potential publishers because of the work that they had done before. And I think they saw the appeal and saw that it sort of fit within kind of the kinds of books that they publish.
How are you marketing the book?
I mean, I'm doing a couple of different things. And also I would mention as well that, one of the reasons I did the Kickstarter too, and that I did the marketing that goes into doing a successful Kickstarter in terms of building up a mailing list and doing those kinds of things the book is really part of an overall advocacy project to normalize the perception of chickens and other farmed animals as family members. And so Kickstarter is a platform to reach people and has its own sort of punch in terms of doing that. So I, did a lot of work in terms of social media beforehand, not really paid, but just sort of my own kind of campaigning. And then, as I said, sort of built up a mailing list. And then, as I said, reached out to people I had met through portfolio reviews and otherwise. And then also, as I said, CARE has done some of its own work. So it has actually been like, there was a story featured actually in kind of like the German equivalent of Oprah magazine called Barbara. So they sort of got that slot for me. There have been a couple of other reviews that have been done. I've lined up a couple of articles, sort of one with Ellen Kale for feature shoot, and then one with Diana Nicolette Gion for 112 Publishing. And then I've been approached directly by a couple of media outlets for articles as well. I have had less success in terms of, say, for example, sort of getting on, news shows or doing those kinds of things. I mean, this thing landed kind of mid-pandemic, which isn't great timing. And also it's not released yet in the United States. It actually, the release is staggered. It came out in Europe at the end of June and it comes out in the United States at the end of September. So I will do a bit more of a push at that point in terms of publicity when, you know, when I when I get closer to that point in time. And, you know, the vegan media is sort of one group to target. I also, as I said, have partnered with some people who are influencers kind of in the sort of the animal rights community and tried to reach them as well.
All right. Anybody else have anything for Janet?
Could you give me the name of your publisher again? I
Sure.
wasn't right now.
Sure. It's Kehrer. I have difficulty pronouncing it. It's Kehrer, so Kehrer. And they sometimes Kehrer Verlag, but Verlag I think basically just means publisher.
Right, but so is that the name of the website or?
Yeah, I think it's, I'll send a link if,
Okay.
you know, after things, but you will, yeah, I think it might be Kehrer.com.
Okay.
I was just curious. I have a question, Janet. Hi, this is Daryl Ann. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I just was curious, are you happy with the way it turned out, or would you have made, because you mentioned that they did the design, correct? So if they did the design, I just wondered if you're satisfied, if you would have done it differently and so forth, or how it changed your perspective on how to approach that.
It was actually, I'd say it was more of a co-design project. I had a pretty strong idea of what I wanted it to look like. I knew, I mean, I was sort of working with them from a, you know, their professionalism, but I knew approximately what size I wanted the book to be. I knew what shape I wanted it to be. I had some ideas around sequencing, but I worked with a designer who was great in terms of, you know, we played with sequencing a little bit and explored different options, you know, with her input on things like whether to sort of use, you'll see there's actually kind of a colored paper in the book for the essays to set them off from the other images.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. So as I said, I'm really, you know, I'm thrilled with the way that it turned out. I think it was beautiful. And just like down to the finest details, like sort of deciding, you know, grab the book again, things like, you know, the color of the headband, you know, in here and how it relates to the other images, you know, in the book and what it looks like. I think probably the place where they had, one of the places where they had the biggest impact is what the actual front cover and back cover look like. So this is the front cover and this is the back cover. Sort of so hard to do this when I'm actually looking at like that.
Yeah, if you put it right in front of your face, then it will be centered.
Yeah, experimenting with sort of what are the best images, I think from a marketing perspective might be a little bit different than the images that I might have chosen. Those probably, the front cover probably isn't the one that I would have chosen, but it works really well in terms of the book design. So as I said, I'm really happy with how the process worked. I think the one thing I'm sad about was not being able to go to Germany to see the book on press. But the thing that was really amazing was Patrick Horn, who was the master printer, Skyped me into the printing press so that I could watch the book being printed for a period of time. And sort of, I think from a customer service perspective, it was really great and sort of making me feel kind of included in the process.
Is the printer in-house to the publisher, or is it a separate entity, the printer?
It's a separate entity, and so they use a couple of different printers in Germany depending on the book and depending on the timing. But I think they go back to a few of them, so they have relationships with them.
And did you say that they this Cure did the Kickstarter? Or
no, I ran the Kickstarter.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I started in terms of getting it ready about 6 months in advance in terms of, I mean, I was already on social media with Instagram, but just in terms of sort of building up a base in terms of email contacts and people who were interested. I put out a newsletter every few weeks that told elements of the story based on, you know, kind of basically how the book was progressing, but then also told stories relating to the project and why and about the specific rescuers. And I'll be continuing that for sort of a, you know, a continuing period again, because part of this project is, as I said, not just making the book, but telling the story. And I also want to sort of celebrate and sort of the rescuers who are behind the project as well. So that was part of it. And I think that pulled a number of people sort of into the process as well and made it more successful.
I have another question. I just wondered, you mentioned about commissioning the essays. Did you compensate them, or did you feel that, did you need to compensate them, or they were okay to do it without compensation?
One of them was compensated, and I mean, one of them was compensated, and one of them is somebody I've done a lot of collaboration with in terms of other things for the, so it was sort of a balance of things, I think. With the people who wrote the short essays, they're getting copies of the book, but also, you know, they've been people to whom I have donated prints and donated materials as well. So it's sort of a bit of a partnership already.
If you go to the Southeast Center website to the BookTalk page, we have links for both Janet and Rick's books. Janet's link goes to their Verlog, and Rick's goes back to his website. So that information is on our website.
Okay, thanks, Michael. And as I said, if you're interested in, I mean, I think kind of, obviously I'm quite happy to sell my copies of the book. It won't be coming out until late September in the United States from a timing perspective. So you'll get it a little bit faster if you get it from me. But if you're outside North America, you probably would want to go directly to Kiera to get a copy.
How many are being printed in the US?
They were actually printed in Germany and then shipped. So the total number of books is about 1,300.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Well, it's been another successful Saturday afternoon. I want to thank Rick and Janet very much for joining us today. Next time, on September 19th, we have Eric Koonsman and his fake news project, and Patrick Murphy with Reserve Mr. Memory. Hopefully you can join us next month. Enjoy the rest of today. I know down here it's supposed to be storming, but it hasn't started yet. Hopefully the weather's going to be nice wherever you are. And stay safe, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you, Michael.
Janet, Rick, if you can hang on for a minute.
Sure.
Bye.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you from Rick.
Hang on for a second, Rick.